So we know marriage and family is not always easy. And we also know that relationships get stuck at some point.
We did, for sure.
We got stuck, for sure. But our passion is now to help people get unstuck.
But in order to go forward, we sometimes have to go back. And what we saw, heard, and experienced in our early years made an imprint in our lives. And it plays out in our present relationships. So take a look at this couple that we're going to show you as they're learning to navigate their relationship.
Apparently there's one way. That is Carrie's way.
I expected to be more patient.
I expected to be able to connect with her all the time.
To be active.
To have the right answer all the time.
Of course, there were things that I wanted.
And I expected to be able to make her laugh all the time.
It would be great if my husband loved to, play soccer and go camping with me.
I enjoy a clean house.
And work out with me.
I like things organized.
Sex almost every week. It's being with your best friend all the time.
That's not always true.
Also, that it would be fun.
And to
get an RV and travel the U.S. I thought it would be a lot of work, which it is.
Because we married forever, but awesome. Yeah.
I always thought of myself as being a very confident, independent person. I didn't realize how vulnerable marriage would make me.
If I do something and I try and it doesn't work out well and she's disappointed or annoyed, that kills me.
Little things would come up and I'd have to check myself and say, why am I feeling this way? Or why do I think he's in the wrong or he's not doing this right? Really, it wasn't any actual issue. It was just my own selfishness.
It all requires work all the time. We don't ever have something, an area of our marriage where we've put the work in, we got it figured out, and we're finished. It's something that we need to really keep working on and keep thinking about and always making sure that our hearts are in the right place. Because as soon as we stop putting that kind of work into it, it's gonna fall apart.
Okay, so where did this couple get these expectations or these beliefs about how life should work? Well, our guess is most of them came from the same place that yours and ours did. Because you see, whether you acknowledge it or not, we all carry memories and experiences from our early years growing up. Things like past relationships, painful family experiences, and for some, even failed marriages. So the events from childhood or early adulthood have really shaped the way you think, the way you act, and the way you interact with the people close to you. So as we unpack this during this session, we're going to give you some thoughts into how we interrupt the negative influence of our past coming into the present. Can you give an example of what this looked like for us?
Well, we're kind of the poster children of the past invading the present, so that's probably why they asked us to do this. But most people can remember some painful experiences in their lives. And many of those experiences you had when you were a child are impacting your life right now. Even the ones that might not have seemed that significant or maybe somewhat irrelevant. But if we don't become more aware of the connection between our past and our present, then it will keep affecting us into our future. So let me start by sharing an example of when we first got married. And when we were newlyweds, Rob and I would sometimes playfully chase around the apartment and tease each other. And we weren't fighting, it was just fun newlywed stuff. But before too long, or if it got too intense, it would really upset me. And Rob didn't understand why all of a sudden I would just say, "Stop it." But he didn't understand the rest of the story. And the rest of the story was I grew up with an alcoholic mother. And when she was drunk, she would chase me and sometimes put me away in a closet to hide me from my father. And sometimes I would hide under the bed with the dog. I was 5 years old at the time, and I came to the conclusion, even in a playful setting, that chasing wasn't fun and it wasn't safe. And my reaction showed it, even though at the time I didn't know why.
Yeah, can you imagine a 5-year-old little girl brain, how that made an imprint on her, that experience in her life? So like most couples though, my story is a little different than hers. I grew up in a family where there really wasn't addiction or abuse. There wasn't that kind of trauma, but there also wasn't any emotional connection. There was nobody pursuing how I'm doing or what I was feeling or what was going on inside me. And if there were intense emotions in my family, they were never expressed. In fact, they were even discouraged. Anger was way off limits, and instead, things like shame and sarcasm were used to correct behavior. So growing up, I developed a belief system that intense emotions are dangerous and they're scary and they should be avoided. I had no models for how to process anger or other intense emotions in a healthy way, so I labeled anger as a character weakness.
So where are we going? What are we going to be talking about tonight? During this series, we hope you'll gain some self-awareness and some skills to help you make healthy changes. You're less likely to live out these old habits and behaviors now or in future relationships. The only person you can change is you. As you are aware of, I'm sure, trying to change other people never works out very well, although we keep trying. These rules of life or beliefs that we have about relationships, how they should work, came from somewhere. We all had different childhood experiences, but the truth is the things we heard, saw, and experienced growing up are stored away in our brains, and they affect how we live our lives and how we make decisions. So unless we work on understanding these imprints of these early years, the past continues to invade the present, most often in negative ways.
So when the past shows up in the present, it often shows up with unhealthy memories and experiences that weigh us down. A lot of what we carry around seems to be rooted in false beliefs that we've developed. And the real weight of what we end up carrying comes from those conclusions that we make based on those false beliefs. These can be conclusions like, I'll never do it right, or I always disappoint her, or I'll never be enough, he'll never listen to me, so I must not be worth listening to, I must not matter, or I'm just not important. Or it can be even very self-incriminating self-talk like, I'm just such an idiot.
I think we had all of those.
Yeah, we probably did. Or you may be on one end of the extreme position of denial, which is saying things like, hey, the past is the past. Of course, there were some hard things growing up, but I'm over that now. Or what I experienced growing up really doesn't affect me as an adult today. Or the other extreme can be fatalism, where we say, hey, what can I do about it? That's just the way it is, or this is just who I am. Or we all have to work with the hand that we were dealt. So that's the third option, where we develop a new way of thinking. It's courageously uncovering where these false beliefs come from, creating new patterns, new rhythms of life, new habits. And for these changes to be lasting and deeply rooted, it takes intentionality, hard decisions, and practice. But with practice, like anything, these can become new habits of the heart.
Yeah. So just like you, our story started long before we met each other. We lived lives like two freight trains that came together down separate tracks, and when we met, those tracks joined into one. These two trains didn't automatically merge into one smoothly as we would hope. Each train had long lines of boxcars with stuff that we were carrying from our lives up to that point. At about the 25-year mark of our marriage, after seeing all the stuff we were carrying in those boxcars of memories from our histories, I wanted out. We really had to work on finding the source of what was derailing us, or we would join a long line of failed marriages that were all too prevalent around us. Now, they say confession is good for the soul but bad for the reputation. So at the risk of looking bad, I thought I might read an excerpt of what I wrote about those years of our marriage, hopefully to give you some insight into our topic tonight and how the past gets in the way today. And this is the way I was thinking when we were in a dark place. We said I do one bright morning in 1975. By the way, who gets married in the morning? But that was the only time the church had. With hope-filled hearts and a white Chevy, we drove off waving goodbye to friends and family. But what we didn't know then is that we were both towing trailers full of stuff from our past, invisible in our love-induced eyes. Sure, there may be some trials ahead, but Christ said to forget what was before and to strive forward. So ready or not, we did. It wasn't long before the stuff from our trailers started leaking out, but we didn't know why or where it came from. As much as I wanted to show love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, all the fruit of the Spirit, something he would do or say caused a mini explosion inside of me, and irritation was my response. I thought at the time it was justified because of what he did or said. And so we played the blame game of whose actions were worse. But inside, I knew something was up with me. Still towing the invisible trailers, we looked good on the outside. We upgraded to a Chrysler LeBaron, 3 children, all the while leading lives of quiet discontent. When you don't know what to do, you just keep putting one foot in front of the other until one day you can't even do that. The shame and the guilt of seeing other happy couples became too much, and I wanted to go far, far away. But I had 3 kids to think of, and I knew in my heart of hearts I had things to face in myself. So one bright morning in 1985, I sat in a counselor's office for the first time, and he gently introduced me to my trailer, which began the process of discovery and freedom. I wanted to believe I could pray it all away or deny it, but I had some work to do to be liberated of the lies I'd come to believe long before we ever got married.
She wrote that probably over 20 years ago, and maybe it's part of your story. Maybe you can resonate with something in that, the way you feel, your experience. But I hope you didn't miss that part about us towing 2 trailers, because you see, I had a trailer of my own that was packed full of stuff. When we got married, there were parts of my life that I obviously knew about, but I wanted to hide them. And some of it I didn't even know was there. But after 2 decades of marriage, when Rocky said to me that we were becoming like my parents, who stayed married for over 60 years but had little emotional connection, I rebelled against that thought. I resisted that picture. But my shift began to take place when I realized I really did have some things that I experienced growing up that I had to face. Things that made an imprint on me as a child, and the impact that it was having on me when they showed up in this relationship. Now, I understand that there are no perfect childhoods and there are no perfect parents. Rocky and I came from 2 very different backgrounds and experiences, but both histories left their own mark. You see, my dad was physically present, but emotionally absent from me as a young boy. I just wasn't on his radar screen as someone important enough to connect with, or someone to teach about masculinity or sexuality or relationships with the opposite sex. So growing up, I learned what I needed to know about relationships and sex and intimacy from the ultimate fount of wisdom, which was my other 12-year-old friends, because we knew everything. So living like that, as you can imagine, as a result, my life progressively moved in the direction of irresponsible, immature, and sometimes reckless decisions. And at an early age, I was living what would be called an unexamined and an unaccountable life.
So think about your own parents and their experiences for a moment. They also came from less than perfect childhoods, and they were dealing with their own histories. As children, naturally, we take personally the things that happen to us. Things like criticism, rejection, emotional abandonment, even abuse, and we come to conclusions about ourselves. But many of these experiences were likely the result of our parents' issues, rather than a reflection of our own worth and our own value as a person. Often people are reluctant to look at their early history. Sometimes it's too painful or disappointing, but one of the most important reasons to explore our first families is to get a better understanding of the entire backdrop of our lives. Once we unpack and diffuse some of these hurts from our past, we can have more compassion and understanding for ourselves and our partner. And then it makes it easier to make these important changes that we really want.
So what about the impact of some of the more obvious experiences that leave a mark? These things like abuse or alcohol or trauma, how do those factors enter in?
Well, like we said before, no one gets through childhood unscathed. But those of us that have experienced alcoholism, violence, trauma, abuse, are particularly at risk for bringing these wounds into the present. In fact, there's a correlation made that your marriage will be as easy or difficult as your childhood.
That's not great news for some.
No, I didn't like hearing that, but there is some truth to it. So adult children of alcoholics or those of us raised with abuse and mental illness learned to adapt and to survive, but it gets in the way of healthy relationships today. In my case, I experienced all of the above. Both my parents were married 4 times each. So counseling became an important part of my journey to uncover the impact of these experiences. And there are many good professionals out there who specialize in this area, and we want to encourage you to pursue this kind of help to help you understand more how to use these tools for growth. Because if it's been painful in your history, you need some support to get through that.
Yeah, sometimes you need somebody else to listen and reflect back to what's going on in your life and give you a different perspective.
Right.
That's helpful. So how do you know when your history is playing out? What are some signs and some warning signs that can tell me that my history is playing out today?
Here are some of the clues. If you have the same conflict over and over again without resolution, boy, we had the same dance. We just kind of did the same dance over and over again and had the same complaints, but we never resolved it. Being triggered, and the definition of a trigger is a reaction not fitting the situation, like Rob chasing me. When a situation occurs repeatedly and each time it reactivates old feelings and emotional responses, either internally or externally, it almost always goes back to an earlier age. Another one is when we find ourselves being angry or frustrated. There are signs of a deeper, more vulnerable emotion being triggered, but we think it's the current situation.
And we think it's the anger, which is really, there's something beneath the anger.
Always.
Every time.
Always there's something beneath anger. We just lead with that. When we find ourselves moving into one of these 3 reactions, which is fight, I want to fight it out, flee, I'd rather avoid it, or freeze, I don't know what to do until I don't say anything, or I stonewall. So if you find yourself falling into one of those every time, it indicates that you're going back to old stuff. And when we just shut down and isolate, we're emotionally distancing ourselves from everyone else. This is called stonewalling, and it's a sign that you're not moving in a healthy direction, and it's usually something that's related to a past memory coming up unaware.
There's another term that comes up when we talk about this topic, and it's called unfinished business. Maybe you've heard that before. So another way of describing what happens when we fail to recognize and interrupt this cycle of the past playing out in the present is called unfinished business. And this phrase has been used as a way just to describe the emotions and the memories surrounding past experiences that a person has avoided or repressed. I tend to avoid these feelings. I tended to move away from them and isolate, whereas Rocky shoved them down, and she was probably more repressed with those feelings. And so, since none of us had a perfect childhood, none of us got all of our needs met perfectly, and we never will. But it becomes a problem in relationships when we expect our spouse to be that person to fill up my tank and meet all those needs and all my desires that really should have been met somewhere else. So unfinished business can refer to the feelings around events and experiences from our past that were not fully processed at the time. Often that's because they were just too overwhelming or too traumatic or too painful. And since these memories and experiences remained unresolved emotionally, they still linger in the background of our hearts and minds. And when feelings such as sadness, grief, fear, anxiety, mistrust, or terror are not properly and appropriately expressed, they're carried into our present lives, and they interfere with this ability to connect emotionally in our present relationships. So you see, unfinished business, in a nutshell, it limits our ability to connect with others as well as ourselves.
Yeah, and it doesn't always have to be extreme traumatic events. It can be the lack of basic human needs, or it can be the lack of being heard or being touched or understood, the lack of intimacy or belonging. And so very often, Rob would look back at his childhood and say, it was fine, it was good, I didn't have any trauma, dinner on the table every night, but there was all these things that were lacking. Sometimes it's a lack of unconditional love or acceptance. Or you had a parent that helicoptered and they didn't give you any autonomy or any ability to make decisions. Or a feeling of being important to someone. While there's nothing wrong with these needs, it becomes a problem when we expect or demand our partner fill up these areas in our lives. Some of these areas really should be coming from God. My belonging, my significance, my worth really comes from God, and He just reflects that back to me, but He's not the source of it. And so then we like to say we became like 2 ticks without a dog. We were trying to suck the blood from each other instead of looking to God to fulfill some of those important areas.
The unfinished business showed up for me also, but in different ways. I already talked about my distorted understanding of conflict and anger. When I elevated my desire for calmness and self-control to an expectation and demand, that became a problem. I labeled anger, and actually any strong emotion, as a character flaw, which you can imagine as a result, I became judgmental and superior. And I behaved in ways that really were not very attractive and very unbecoming. And I became a little difficult to love at times like that, I'm sure.
Yeah, kind of, a little bit.
So how did unfinished business show up for you?
Yeah, for me, it looked like I was looking for a love that wouldn't disappoint, that would be consistently there for me, because my mom and dad weren't. I was looking for someone that wouldn't judge me. Well, clearly that didn't happen. So when I was hurt, I would jump to conclusions about him and get angry and become judgmental too. So you can see how that worked. I would do what I did when I was young. I would pull away and protect myself. I didn't know how to resolve conflict without anger or shutting down. So instead of being able to talk through it and say what I was feeling and come to some resolution, man, we just had the great divide.
Well, I hope you hung in there with us, but we want to wrap up with some suggestions on where to go from here. When we started this session, we started off by saying we understand that everyone gets stuck at some point, but we don't want to leave you there, because it's also our passion to help give you some tools and some steps to get unstuck. So let's look at some growth steps. First, it would be really important to invest the time to learn about your own damaged love style and your own unfinished business, the things that you're carrying from the past into this relationship today. We recommend reading material like a book called How We Love by Milan and Kay Yurkovich. Become a student, not only of your own damaged love style, but your partner's.
Understand your triggers. I know a lot of people have that mistaken. They think that a trigger is anytime they get upset. But a trigger is really stuff from your history. So understand what that is and do a deep dive there. You have to rewrite old messages and false beliefs. I had a lot of them about life, about God, about relationships. I had to come to terms with some of those things I had come to believe and rewrite them. Some of those conclusions I came to at 5 or 6 and I stuck with them. And it was a 5 or 6-year-old coming to those conclusions. Wasn't so healthy. And ask yourself, am I relating on a fairly regular basis with empathy and compassion? Or am I relating with self-protection and defensiveness? And there's good material on learning what are the defense mechanisms that we use. So if I'm leading with self-protection and defensiveness, I'm not living out of my best self or the way God would have me.
John Gottman is a kind of a world-renowned marriage researcher. He's been doing research for over 40 years. And he has found that there needs to be what he calls a 5-to-1 ratio of positive to negative. And what he means by this is that for every one negative feeling or negative interaction between partners, there has to be 5 positive feelings or interactions. And you might go, wow, 5-to-1. That seems like a high bar. I don't know if I can keep up with that. But look at what Proverbs 15:4 says. It says, the soothing tongue is a tree of life, but a perverse tongue crushes the spirit. I think this makes it clear how powerful our tongue is, how powerful our words are. They can give life or they can give death, and how the words we use can also crush the spirit. So it's more than just saying you hurt my feelings. The writer of Proverbs says unkind words actually crush the spirit. That's a powerful picture. So learn to talk with each other and learn to listen. Be a generous listener. This takes practice, and most couples don't practice, and most couples don't do this very well, because a truly connecting conversation doesn't happen naturally. It needs to slow down. There are typically 3 kinds of conversations we have: small talk, business talk, and soul talk. And couples can be pretty good at small talk and even business talk. Things like who's picking up the kids, or what's on the calendar this week, or what time are we leaving for dinner. But they're not very good at soul talk unless we've practiced. So these tools are available because this kind of conversation is not like most other casual conversations.
Yeah, and I think if you can't do soul talk and really hear one another, you can't resolve any conflicts.
Right. Because
you just get too triggered all the time. So one of the other tips is learn how to interrupt the negative thought process and the false beliefs when the false beliefs come in, and how to recognize when your past is invading the present. You can choose the way you think. Do your reactions make sense? Or are they out of proportion? Do I react too much to something and I need to pay attention to that? Also, recognize black and white thinking. It's all good or all bad, or he's all bad, or this situation's all bad, I'm all bad. Catastrophizing, emotional reasoning. I base everything on how I'm feeling, not thinking about it and bringing in some logic. Discounting the positive, faulty comparisons, and false expectations. I know I was guilty of all of the above. And then ask yourself, am I being triggered by something else? So if my reaction is an 8, 9, or 10 on a 1 to 10 scale, Richter scale of emotions, if it's an 8, 9, or 10, it's historical. If it's, I don't like what happened and my reaction is, oh, that kind of is annoying or that's a bummer, it's probably not. But if it's big, even if you shut down, it usually means it's tied into something in the history. And then try on the other person's perspective. Try on their glasses. Really try to dial into what they're thinking. And I think I must have said to you for 25 years, can you just tell me back what I said, even if you don't agree? And he would never do that because he thought it was a test. But if you don't reflect back what the other person's saying, they don't know if you've really gotten their perspective. And own your own stuff without comparing. Be responsible to look in the mirror before you look outward. Own your side of the street, because that's the only thing you have control over is what you do. And one day we will stand before the Lord and we will answer for ourselves. I can't say I would have been more loving if he had been more loving. God's not going to go for that. So own what you can own. We saw, heard, and experienced things from our past growing up. And if we don't recognize and deal with them, we bring those negative things into our present day relationship in unhealthy ways. So without intentional work, our past programming drives our current emotional responses. Rob didn't cause my insecurities, but I blamed him for how I felt. So I saw this quote the other day that said, if you never heal from what hurt you, you'll bleed on the people who didn't cut you. So talk about your own history with your partner. See these experiences through new eyes and see if you can develop more compassion for one another. We'd been married more than 25 years before we started to understand the significance of how the past was invading our present.
It's a long time journey, and some of you have a lot of journey left ahead of you, so it's worth investing time to do this. I knew Rocky's story. I knew her past. I knew about her alcoholic mother, the abuse, the divorce. But it wasn't until I really listened to her story at a deeper level that I could listen with compassion and I could begin to understand the impact of that experience.
Yeah, and I would suggest too, if you came to me and shared something about his history, the only thing you need to say in response is, thank you for sharing. You don't need to offer your opinion or what you think about it, just thank you for sharing, because you want to provide a safe place to do that sharing.
And I'm not asking you to fix that.
Right.
I'm not asking you to help you change the way I feel.
Right.
No. We can't live in denial that our experiences from the past don't affect us. And we can't live with fatalism, saying that there's nothing we can do about it. So when God talks about restoration, which is a word that's used in Scripture often, it's not simply going back to the way things used to be. Restoration is creating something entirely new, something entirely different. And we pray that you'll make the courageous choice to not be held back by your past, but move forward into a new experience of healthier relationships altogether. Thanks for being with us. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks.